The Watsons by Jane Austen, Part 15. He proved a very useful addition to their table. Without him, it would have been a party of such very near relations as could have felt little interest, and perhaps maintained little complacence, but his presence gave variety and secured good manners. He was in fact excellently qualified to shine at a round game, and a few situations made him appear to greater advantage. He played with spirit and had a great deal to say, and though with no wit himself, could sometimes make use of wit in an absent friend, and had a lively way of retailing in a commonplace, a saying a mere nothing that had great effect at a card table. The ways and good jokes of Osborne Castle were now added to his ordinary means of entertainment. He repeated the smart sayings of one lady, detailed the oversights of another, and indulged them when with a copy of Lord Osborne's style of overdrawing himself on both cards. The clock struck 9 while he was thus agreeably occupied, and when Nanny came in with her master's basin of gruel, he had the pleasure of observing to Mr. Watson that he should leave him at supper while he went home to dinner himself. The carriage was ordered to the door, and no entreaties for his staying longer could now avail, for he well knew that if he stayed he must sit down to supper in less than 10 minutes, which to a man whose heart had long been fixed on calling his next meal a dinner was quite insupportable. On finding him determined to go, Margaret began to wink and nod at Elizabeth to ask him to dinner for the following day, and Elizabeth, at last not able to resist hints which her own hospitable social temper more than half seconded, gave the invitation. Would he give Robert the meeting, they would be very happy. With the greatest pleasure, was his first reply in a moment afterwards. That is, if I can possibly get here in time, but I shoot with Lady Osborne and therefore must not engage. You will not think me unless you see me. And so he departed, delighted with the uncertainty in which he had left it. Margaret, in the joy of her heart, under circumstances which she chose to consider as peculiarly propitious, would willingly have made a confidant of Emma when they were alone for a short time the next morning, and had proceeded so far as to say, "The young man who was here last night, my dear Emma, and returns to-day, is more interesting to me than perhaps you may be aware." But Emma, pretending to understand nothing extraordinary in the words, made some very inapplicable reply, and jumping up, ran away from a subject which was odious to her feelings. As Margaret would not allow a doubt to be repeated of Musgrave's coming to dinner, preparations were made for his entertainment much exceeding what had been deemed necessary the day before. And taking the office of superintendence entirely from her sister, she was half the morning in the kitchen herself, directing and scolding. After a great deal of indifferent cooking and anxious suspense, however, they were obliged to sit down without their guest. Tom Musgrave never came, and Margaret was at no pains to conceal her vexation under the disappointment of repress the peevishness of her temper. The peace of the party for the remainder of that day and the whole of the next, which comprised the length of Robert and Jane's visit, was continuously invaded by her fretful displeasure and querulous attacks. Elizabeth was the usual object of both. Margaret had just respect enough for her brother and sister's opinion to behave properly by them, but Elizabeth and the maids could never do anything right, and Emma, whom she deemed no longer to think about, found the continuance of the gentle voice beyond her calculation short. Eager to be as little among them as possible, Emma was delighted with the alternative of sitting above with her father and warmly entreated to be his constant companion each evening. And as Elizabeth loved company of any kind too well not to prefer being below, at all risks, as she had rather talk of Croydon to Jane with every interruption of Margaret's perverseness than sit with only her father, who frequently could not endure talking at all. The affair was so settled, as soon as she could be persuaded to believe it no sacrifice on her sister's part. To Emma, the change was most acceptable and delightful. Her father, if ill, required little more than gentleness and silence, and being a man of sense and education, was, if able to converse, a welcome companion. In his chamber, Emma was at peace from the dreadful mortifications of an unequal society and family discord, from the immediate endurance of hard-hearted prosperity, low-minded conceit, and wrong-headed folly, engrafted on an untoward disposition. She still suffered from them in the contemplation of their existence. In memory and in prospect, but for the moment she ceased to be tortured by their effects. She was at leisure, she could think and read, though her situation was hardly such as to make reflection very soothing. The evils arising from the loss of her uncle were neither trifling nor likely to lessen, and when thought had been freely indulged in contrasting the past and the present, the employment of mind, the dissipation of unpleasant ideas which only reading could produce, made her thankfully turn to a book. End of part 15.